Impact of Industrial Revolution on literature. The causes and effects of Industrial Revolution have already been discussed. So today let us focus our study on how the Industrial Revolution influenced literature. So let us first understand why and how Industrial Revolution had its impact on literature. Literature is a reflection of life and society. Plato's idea of mimesis argues that a work of art is an imitation of life. So literature is a mirror to life, which represents the social, political, and historical growth of a society at a great length. A writer is influenced by the state of affairs of the time to which he belongs. Thus, a literary work written in a particular period reflects the situation of life of that period. The happenings and circumstances of a period form the subject matter of the literary works of the period. Industrial Revolution, which began in Great Britain during the middle of the 18th century, provided a wide range of material to the 19th century writers. Thus, the literature of this period grew massively. Literary writers responded to the positive and negative impacts of Industrial Revolution through their literary works. The literature of Industrial Revolution, which appeared in the form of essays, fiction, and poetry, was a response to the development of technology and the economic growth, as well as the labor and demographic changes that it brought. Literature of the period of Industrial Revolution differed greatly from the literature of the previous era. The major changes were seen in themes and language. The themes of the literary works of the Industrial Revolution varied. Social issues, nature, technology were the major themes of this period. The literary writers of this period were concerned with the social issues which were a direct consequence of industrialization and urbanization. Now, the Industrial Revolution had led to the mass influx of people moving from the village into the cities in search of jobs. Industrial Revolution had changed the social structure and created a new social class, that is the working class. The workers worked for long hours with low wages. Even the women and children worked in factories on low wages. Children started working at a very small age, and they would work for long hours and sometimes even die from exhaustion. So these were the themes, or these were the social issues that were discussed in the works of the writers of this period. For example, William Blake wrote a poem titled The Chimney Sweepers, which portrays the misery of a child labor. Charles Dickens had a big concern on the social issues, and he criticized the situation through his novel Hard Times. The novel tells about the poverty and harsh life of the working class. Similarly, the novel by Rebecca Harding Davis, titled Life in the Iron Mills, speaks about the same issue. Nature became the dominant subject in the writings of the Romantic writers. Now, Industrial Revolution had transformed the environment significantly. Small towns changed into big cities. Then the factories emerged, which gave rise to pollution, which contaminated the land, air, and water. Railroads and canals appeared in the countryside. Hence, the mechanization destroyed the beauty of nature, and people longed to be in the company of nature. So, the writers brought back the beauty of nature into their works. And this natural setting could be seen in the works of the Romantic poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Byron. The literary works during the era also talked about technology. The inventions of new technology had inspired writers to write about the possibility of the use of science and machine in life. A novel like The Time Machine explores the possibility of human being travel through time. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, a novel which depicts a possibility that man can be created by science. So these were the themes which were taken up by the writers of the 19th century. A major change was also seen in the language. Literary works before 18th century used the popular form of poetry. Therefore, the structure, the use of metaphor, rhyme, rhythm, meter, and the word choice were very important. In the 17th century, there was a literary school which is called metaphysics, and the metaphysical writers used high metaphor, symbolism, and difficult words, which made their works complex and difficult to comprehend. But in contrast to this, in the 18th century, during the Industrial Revolution, the literary works were seen as the voice of common people. So the literary works were used as media to express thought and feeling towards what happened in the society during the Industrial Revolution era. So, in line with the theme of the works, which portrayed social issues of common people, the language used in the works was the vernacular language. Thus, to represent the voice of common people and to be understood by people in general, the literary works were written mostly in simple and ordinary language. Besides, the literary works during this era were dominated by prose. The writers of this era did not pay attention on structure and musical device of the works as much as the works of the previous era did. They were concerned, or their concern was more on the use of language which represented the emotion. So the use of vernacular language and unstructured form defined the language of literary works in the Industrial Revolution era. The Industrial Revolution figured prominently across a broad range of literary genres, while social critics such as Thomas Carlyle, John Ruskin, Matthew Arnold, and Henry Adams examined the cultural changes accompanied by the machine. Novelists like Charles Dickens, Rebecca Harding Davis, and Elizabeth Gaskell provided a realistic treatment of modern working conditions. Meanwhile, poets such as William Wordsworth, Whitman, Lord Byron contemplated the artist's role in such world. During the initial stages of Industrial Revolution in England, the literature, for the most part, supported the new discoveries of science. By the close of the 18th century, however, the early Romantics began to view the emerging technology in a different light. Wordsworth, in his preface to the second edition of Lyrical Ballads, asserted that the rise of technology blunted the mind. Charles Dickens' realistic and ironic depiction of industrial towns in hard times underscored the damaging effects of urbanization on the working class. The transfer of new technologies across the Atlantic also shaped the development of literature in the United States. Writers such as Whitman and Emerson, for the most part, embraced the new technology, finding in the railroad a vehicle for uniting the country and furthering democratic ideals. However, such a response was not universally shared by Hawthorne, Melville, and Mark Twain, who provided alternative industrialism through the metaphors, themes, and details of their works. The issues surrounding the relationship between technology and culture continue to interest critics and writers even into the 20th century. So, Industrial Revolution had significant influence on the themes and language of literary works in the 18th century. In the Industrial Revolution, writers used literature as a means of criticism. The growing cities, the enhancement of technology, and the effects of the industrialization changed the directions of the literary works of this period. So this is how Industrial Revolution influenced the literature of that time generally.